For decades, the global order felt pretty much set in stone. Western powers, led by the US, were the ones calling the shots. But what happens when that very system starts to, well, eat its own? Today, we're digging into a really powerful analysis that argues the old alliances aren't just shifting, they're actually rupturing, and former partners are now finding themselves square in the crosshairs.
So, the analysis we're exploring is framed around this hypothetical speech set in 2026 from a future Canadian Prime Minister. And he kicks it off with a really stark word: rupture. He's not talking about a slow, gentle change. He means a fundamental, violent break from the past. So, what exactly is breaking?
Okay, so at the very heart of this rupture is the rules-based international order. And the main argument we're going to unpack today is that this isn't some predictable evolution. Nope, it's a sudden, violent snap.
Now, the analysis we're looking at has a pretty provocative definition for this whole concept. It basically argues that for a huge part of the world, the rules-based order was always a system built by the West for the West, one where the rules could be conveniently bent or even outright broken whenever it suited them.
This thing wasn't just run by the US alone. It was a partnership. For a long time, other Western nations, these so-called middle powers like Canada or a lot of countries in Europe, they helped uphold this order. It was a bargain, a deal. But the analysis we're diving into claims this deal was always based on a lie everyone agreed to tell.
And that brings us right to the heart of that lie, what the source calls a useful fiction. The idea here is that the entire bargain was built on a kind of shared hypocrisy that all the partners just quietly understood. And this quote just cuts right to it. Through the imagined words of a prime minister, the source is basically saying these Western allies weren't clueless. They got the double standards. They knew the biggest player in the game, the US, would just excuse itself from the rules whenever it wanted to.
So, okay, if they knew the system was flawed, why on earth did they play along? Well, because, as this quote makes crystal clear, that fiction was useful. It was good for them. It served their own national interests and gave them real, tangible benefits that made being a junior partner in this whole American-led system totally worth it.
So what kind of benefits are we talking about? Well, according to this analysis, these middle powers got a huge security umbrella under NATO, they got access to the US-dominated global financial system, and they got protected trade routes. And this is critical, the argument is that there were also partners in profiting from a global system that wasn't exactly equal for everyone.
And this right here is the turning point. The deal is off. The central claim for everyone. And this right here is the turning point. The deal is off. The central claim being made is that for these middle powers, all those benefits have basically vanished, and the very system that used to protect them has now become a threat.
Okay, so this is where the story takes a really dark turn. The analysis claims that the United States isn't just focusing on its usual adversaries anymore. Now, it's turning its aggressive economic and political moves on its own closest allies.
And the analysis gives some truly shocking examples to back this up. It points to a former US president openly talking about colonizing Greenland, which, is part of Denmark, a NATO ally, and even musing about annexing Canada. It also brings up reports of US officials meeting with separatist movements inside Canada. The tools of empire, it seems, are now being pointed inwards.
This quote just perfectly captures that new reality, doesn't it? That feeling of being a protected partner is gone. The analysis suggests that these middle powers are now feeling this sense of pure desperation, that if they don't figure out a new way to stand on their own, they're just going to be consumed by their most powerful friend.
But before these nations can really play the victim card, the analysis forces a look in the mirror. It uses Canada as a case study to show just how deeply complicit these countries were in the exact same system that now has them spooked. And man, the data here really is telling. You look at these major UN resolutions on everything from supporting Palestinian refugees to condemning illegal settlements, and Canada has consistently voted right alongside the United States, often against almost the entire rest of the world. And this goes way beyond just votes. The analysis points to things like Canada's history of selling weapons to Israel and taking part in US-led military interventions in places like Haiti and Libya as more proof of its role as a very willing junior partner. This chart, wow, it just brilliantly shows you why those US threats are so powerful. I mean, with almost 80% of its exports going to the United States, Canada is incredibly vulnerable.
According to the analysis,
This chart, wow, it just brilliantly shows you why those US threats are so powerful. I mean, with almost 80% of its exports going to the United States, Canada is incredibly vulnerable.
According to the analysis, this economic chokehold gives the US massive leverage, turning the threat of something like tariffs into a truly devastating weapon.
So, if you're a middle power facing this kind of existential threat from your main partner, what do? Well, according to the analysis, you start a frantic and maybe a little hypocritical search for some new friends. And this timeline shows that pattern so clearly. All of a sudden, you've got leaders from France, the UK, and Canada all making trips to Beijing. After years of basically echoing US criticism of China, these very same Western allies are now suddenly looking east for an economic and political lifeline.
The whole debate over electric vehicles is a perfect case study of this new conflict. For a country like Canada, letting Chinese EV companies build plants there is a total no-brainer. You get cheaper cars for people and more local jobs. But for the US, it's seen as a direct threat to its own car industry, which leads to massive pressure on Canada to just fall in line. Their national interests are now in a head-on collision.
And this brings us right back to the central argument of this entire analysis. This big pivot isn't some moral awakening. It's not about a sudden change of heart about how the world should work. It's about survival, plain and simple. The analysis concludes that all that human rights talk was always just a tool, and now that it's not so convenient anymore, it's being quietly put back in the toolbox.
And so, we're left with this massive critical question. The old rulebook, it's been torn to shreds. The very architects of that system are now fighting amongst themselves. So as this whole rupture gets deeper, who's going to be the one with the power to write the rules for whatever comes next?